recording the call. This is a National Kosh media briefing on October 26th on hazards of the gig economy and what's going on at the American Staffing Association. We have three of our four speakers with us, unless Lena, I haven't heard Lena join yet. Jessica Martinez, who is co-executive director of National Kosh, Lou Kimmel, who is executive director of New Labor, and Dave DeSario, who's a producer of Days Work, a film about the temp industry. And just so folks know, we've been pushing out tweets about this topic with the hashtag #DemandTempSafety and have over 200,000 impressions so far. With that, I will turn it over to Jessica.
Thanks so much, Roger, and good morning or good afternoon to everyone on the call, wherever you're located. Thanks for joining us today. We're here today to discuss safety for temporary workers and what the staffing industry is or is not doing to address this issue. The American Staffing Association, as many of you know, is having its annual meeting right here in San Diego this week, Staffing World 2016. So it's a very appropriate time to discuss temp worker safety. First, let me tell you a little bit about National Kosh, the organization I represent, what we do. National Kosh stands for the National Council for Occupational Safety and Health. We're a national network of about 20 local health and safety Kosh groups throughout the country, working together to empower workers in improving working conditions. We also have a very extensive network of partners consisting of worker centers, union, and community organizations throughout the country. National Kosh believes safety for temporary and contract workers is a top priority because temp workers are exposed to so many hazards on the job. Let me give you some basic facts about temp workers and safety issues. 3 million workers on assignment from temp agencies in a typical work week. That's from the American Staffing Association. Actual numbers may be higher. Not all temps or contract workers go through temp agencies. 802 temporary or contract workers died on the job just in 2014. That's the latest data we have from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. Deaths of temporary workers represent almost 17%, or 1 out of 6 out of all workplace fatalities in 2014. We also have data from ProPublica that shows higher rates of injuries for temp workers. In 2013, ProPublica looked at workers' compensation data in 5 states and found injury rates for temp workers between 36% and 72% higher for temp workers than for full-time employees. So why is it that temp workers are so much at risk? We know that temps are often asked to do the dirtiest, most dangerous jobs, clean out storage tanks,
can I interrupt?
Heavy lifting without proper equipment, etc.
Let's wait till the end for questions, okay?
Can I interrupt for a second?
No, we'd like to wait till
the end
for questions.
I haven't turned all the way up. I can't hear. Can you speak up a little bit more?
Okay, Jessica, can you adjust your volume?
Yeah, is that better? Can you hear me?
Yeah, that's better.
Okay, great. Yeah, so just to be clear, folks, we're going to ask folks to put their phone on mute, and we'll save questions till the end unless you can't hear us. So thank you, sir, for letting me know, but we'll try to get the program going. So we were talking a little bit about why are temp workers at risk, and we know that temps are often asked to do some of the most dirtiest jobs, which may include cleaning out storage tanks, heavy lifting without proper equipment, and a whole bunch of other variety of very high hazard jobs. Temps often do not get training, education, materials that are given to full-time employees. There's a clear language barrier in many cases. We know that there are several undocumented and immigrant workers that take temp assignments. They are often not given training or materials in a language they understand. Dangerous jobs, plus lack of training equals a risky combination. Could be why we see such high rates of injury and death among temp workers. However, what is American Staffing Association doing about this issue? Well, we know that Staffing World 2016 is in San Diego this week. It's an annual gathering of thousands of delegates from staffing agencies all over the U.S., which include the top firms represented, such as Manpower, Kelly Girl, Labor Ready, and many others. But what are they saying about safety in their industry? We checked their agenda. It's 3 days of workshops, panel plenaries, more than 60 sessions, 23 pages of session descriptions. And unfortunately, in this whole extensive program, we only found one session on safety, a walk around of the San Diego Convention Center, which is only limited to 25 participants on 2 different sessions. So we do believe that ASA can do a lot more. When 1 out of 6 workers who dies on the job is a temp worker, when injury rates are 36 to 72% higher for temp workers than for full-time workers. I am not sure that having just one workshop on safety during a 3-day conference really meets the challenge this industry is facing. And it speaks mountains when we know that ASA and OSHA recently renewed a partnership on safety. They just announced it yesterday. This partnership is on the ASA website, but there's no information, no workshop or session about this effort to raise safety standards at Staffing World 2016. Dave DeSario, who's on the call, will join us. We'll share later with you some questions and concerns about whether ASA is actually in compliance with the requirements of this partnership with OSHA. You know, we're not a member of ASA. We did not attend Staffing World 2016. We don't know what goes into determining their agenda or workshop speakers, but I can tell you that at National COSH, we are working hard right now on our national conference, which will be this December 6th through the 8th outside of Baltimore. We received workshop proposals from throughout our network. The ones that make it to our agenda are the issues that are top priorities, ideas and issues that we want to share with their colleagues. You'll definitely hear about temp worker safety at our conference and safety for poultry workers, issues on language justice, infectious diseases, preventing workplace violence, and other issues that really matter to us. Now, if you look at our website, I'm sure there are so many issues from a few years back that won't be addressed at this year's National COSH conference because you can't fit everything on one agenda. The issues we don't cover are lower priorities, not the work our members are engaged or excited about. I hope the lack of safety issues on the agenda of Staffing World 2016 does not mean that safety is a low priority for the American Staffing Association. I hope you'll get a chance to ask them about it, and I'd be interested to hear what they have to say. Now, I'd like to introduce our next speaker. I'd like to do a quick check if Lina Hernandez is on the call. If not, we'll move on to Lou. Is Lina? Hi, is Lina Hernandez on the call? Okay. So we're going to move on to our next speaker, which is Lou Kimmel. Lou Kimmel serves as the Executive Director for New Labor, an organization based in New Jersey that advocates for worker rights, including worker safety for temp workers. Lou Kimmel has experience knowing firsthand what are some of the issues for temp workers and some of the organizational efforts to improve the lives of temp workers. Lou?
Sure. Thanks, Jessica. Thanks for National COSH for putting this call together as well. It's very important. So as mentioned, my name is Lou Kimmel. I'm the Executive Director of New Labor. We are an organization that educates, organizes, and fights for better conditions of work here in New Jersey with over 3,000 members throughout the state. Most of our members are low-wage Latino immigrant workers, and many of them do work in temp agencies. So for us at New Labor, we're all about creating a culture of safety. So workplace health and safety are a fundamental human right and need to be upheld. Right? Our health and safety is not a game. Respect for workers is respect for health and safety. And as a voice for the temp industry, personally, we think ASA should step up to the plate when it comes to addressing issues of health and safety for workers within their industry. For me, I'd like to take a step back to kind of understand why conditions are this way for temp agencies, to understand the bigger picture and supply chains. And this is coming from our experience here in New Jersey, but it does apply to other areas as well. So a lot of times there's large multinational corporations that hire out third-party logistics entities or other groups like warehouses, which in turn hire out temp agencies, which in the end hire out workers. So each one is, wants to make a profit and takes their cut along the way and pushes conditions down all the way to the very bottom. So temp workers are at the bottom of this chain here, and they often receive no general training or site-specific training when it comes to health and safety. And there's danger. No one wants to take responsibility for these conditions, and oftentimes we're seeing a lot of finger pointing, especially at the lower levels between a client firm and a temp agency, each one trying to avoid responsibility when it comes to an injury or a death, right? So here in New Jersey, that happened. In 2013, Toronto Smith, on his first day on the job, working within the Amazon supply chain through a third-party logistics entity called Genco, through a temp agency where he basically got crushed to death. And in the end, the agencies only had to pay $6,000 for that death. Other instances I can send out links as well include on-target staffing and Sterling Seating, which collectively had to pay $190,000 in fines for not doing hazard assessments, not having HAZCOM programs, as well as Whitlock Packaging and Action Group, which had to pay $172,000 in fines collectively, again, for not having emergency exits, not having violations around noise and forklift issues. Locally, we see issues with a place called Access Bio that sends temp workers from different agencies there, where there's machines that they're using that are creating finger punctures because there's no guarding on those machinery. So we know what the issues are, but we have to do something about them. So on a simple level, we need to make sure that the existing regulations are being upheld, right? We know that OSHA has the Temp Worker Initiative and there's recommendations from NIAS when it comes to temp workers. We need to make sure they're sticky, and the American Staffing Association has a role there as a voice for temp industry to make sure that it's happening. Secondly, as I mentioned before around this supply chain system, we need to make sure that when conditions of work are happening under a quote-unquote joint employer, that is being enforced. So if a client firm is having supervision over the workforce, collecting timesheets, disciplining workers, or what have you, that they're both being held responsible for health and safety conditions in the workplace. This creates issues for temp agencies that are afraid of losing their contract with a client firm, so sometimes they might know that there's issues, but they're afraid to speak up as well. Continuing, it's very important, something we do here at New Labor is to push for building comprehensive safety and health programs that include training and also formation of workplace health and safety committees, which address immediate problems in the very now, but also long-term creating a culture of safety. And if that doesn't work, what we do here, we do direct actions. That means we do a consejo meeting where workers come together, talk about what the issues are in the workplace, and create a plan of action to address them, either through direct action or doing formal complaints with OSHA, as well as training, we call them safety liaisons, to be able to identify hazards in the workplace and eliminate them through formal complaints or taking direct action there. Finally, I'd just like to add, you need to organize. So in a traditional or atraditional sense, there's recent cases, precedents that are being upheld or reissued in a way from the National Labor Relations Board that basically would allow temp workers, whether they're not direct employees of their on-site employer, to be able to be part of the same bargaining unit. So that creates possibilities as well to create sticky and long-term conditions of health and safety.
Thank you, Lou. Thank you for your words, and thank you for sharing some of the work that New Labor moves forward on a daily basis. We're now going to move on to our next speaker. I'd like to introduce Dave DeSario. Dave is a former temporary worker who has produced an award-winning documentary about the temp industry. It's called A Day's Work, and it features the story of a young man named Dave Davis who was killed at a Bacardi bottling plant during his first shift on his first day at work. Dave also has a great deal of knowledge about the American Staffing Association, and they are and are not doing about safety on the job. Dave, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Jessica. Temp workers have really been injured and killed at alarming rates for decades, but it's really only been within the last 2 or 3 years that the industry has recognized this as a serious PR problem, because these worker injuries and the attention to these injuries really hurt their business. The temporary staffing industry is a $100 billion a year industry. Knowledge of worker injuries drives up their workers' compensation insurance costs. It makes attracting employees more difficult, and it damages their relationship with their clients. So it's a big problem for their profitability. So if you question the safety and health record of this $100 billion a year industry, the American Staffing Association, the industry's lobbying group, will give you a predictable and very positive response. And I will admit that the responses sound really good on paper, but that's about it. So I'm going to give you 4 quick examples of how the American Staffing Association will respond to you on questions of safety. And in each case, point out how each is fundamentally about public relations and not real measures taken to protect the lives and limbs of temporary workers. So first, the big one you'll probably hear is that the American Staffing Association formed an alliance with OSHA. And that sounds really good. But there have been literally hundreds of other organizations and companies that formed alliances with OSHA nationally and regionally before the ASA did. These include organizations that don't even have particularly serious safety and health concerns, like the Graphic Arts Coalition or the American Apparel and Footwear Association. So having an alliance with OSHA is not an indication of addressing particular safety and health concerns. And I've got the word in my notes, so I can't spell it. It's chutzpah, which is what the American Staffing Association has in promoting this alliance. The alliance was initiated by OSHA. It was OSHA that reached out to the American Staffing Association and pressured them to cooperate. It was not the other way around. So promoting this as their idea is really mixing up what happened. For the ASA, really the biggest thing is just saying that they have it and not following through on it. And perhaps the best example and the simplest, most direct one is what's happening right now. So you have the Staffing World Conference, their biggest industry conference going on, and this conference is in violation of the alliance agreement with OSHA. Specifically, the agreement clearly states that the industry should have OSHA, quote, speaking and exhibiting at conferences and meetings. Staffing World is the biggest industry conference of the year. OSHA was not invited. So having this alliance with OSHA, saying they have it, is really about all they can do. Second, the American Staffing Association might tell you that they have formed an employee safety committee, because that's what big industries and big companies do when they're addressed with a problem. They form a committee to look into it further. Well, what I can tell you about the employee safety committee is that it has 0 employees on it. They're not doing anything to listen to the concerns of the workers on the ground or of the representatives of workers on the ground. You even look at who the chairperson of this committee is, and they are a loss control specialist. That's someone that works to reduce workers' comp rates, specifically on protecting safety and health. Third, and this is another new one, you might hear that the American Staffing Association partnered with the National Safety Council on a safety program. And that's, of course, absolutely true. But you should know that the National Safety Council frequently partners with organizations that have OSHA alliances, gets grant funding to work with OSHA alliance organizations. And the biggest one is right on page 2 of the agreement that ASA has with the National Safety Council under the heading of Program Purpose. One of the purposes of the program is, quote, to enhance the image of the industry with respect to job seekers, staffing clients, the government, and the media. So you're going to hear about this National Safety Council partnership because that accomplishes one of the program purposes. Just telling you in the media that they have it accomplishes the purpose, even though they have literally done nothing to identify agencies that are particularly unsafe for workers, to identify agencies that have better records, or to even begin implementing the program. They'll still tell you they have it because that accomplishes one of the purposes. And fourth, the last point I make, which perhaps is the biggest and the simplest, the American Staffing Association has made no public admission of higher injury rates. So all you have to do is ask, are temp workers at greater risk of injury on the job, yes or no? And they won't tell you that. And, you know, they have these alliances, they have these partnerships, they're looking into it. I think the simplest way to look at it, you know, the first step in solving a problem is recognizing that there is one, and they refuse to admit that there is a problem. What they might tell you is that they can't answer that question, that because, quote, OSHA has not established conclusive data. And again, this is true. OSHA has not established conclusive data. NIOSH, the research division of the CDC, has. State departments of labor have, including Washington State, which recognized that temp workers were at greater risk of injury as early as 1998. Academic studies have established conclusive data, and investigative reporting and data analyses have established conclusive data. And in addition, talk about common sense, ROI, return on investment. Of course, it doesn't make sense for companies to spend money and spend time on training of temp workers who belong to someone else and no one knows how long they're going to be there. So the evidence is clear, and the logic behind it is clear and has been clear for many decades. Temp workers are at greater risk of injury, but this industry will not tell you that. So from that point and from the other three, I hope you will clearly see worker safety is a PR problem for the staffing industry, and they've treated it that way. So thank you all for your attention.
Thanks so much, Dave. I thank you for sharing your information about the American Staffing Association. I'm now going to move to Lena. If Lena's on the call, just one last shout out to see if she's here to share her story. If not, we'll move on to questions. Okay. All right. Unfortunately, Lena Hernandez, hello? Okay. Yeah, unfortunately, Lena doesn't seem like she's on the call. And what we'll do is transition into questions. If there's any questions for Dave, Lou, or myself, welcome any questions or comments.
And if you could please just state your name and your news organization if you do have a question.
Yeah, hi, this is Joe from Labor Press.
Go ahead, Joe.
Hello?
Hi, Joe. Go ahead.
Yeah, hi. So I think this question is for Lou. Can you talk a little bit more about efforts to try to actually organize temp workers?
More about efforts to organize temp workers, did you say?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, I was on mute there. So you mean becoming members of a union, or in terms of a traditional organizing? So we're a worker center, so that's kind of where we come from initially at its root. So that's more, within the community. So sometimes it's, shop by shop in that sense. So as I mentioned before, we have Worker Council, which goes every 2 weeks, where members run it, and people from the community come to address their issues, be it wage theft or workplace health and safety, and they create a plan of action to confront them. So sometimes we've done things like sort of occupied temp agencies, and coming out of that, we create, kind of like a good neighbor agreement with the temp agency. In this case, it was On Target Staffing, around conditions like respect and van transportation, that were the issues that were being addressed by workers, right? And that came as a result of direct action. So we call those essentially responsible employer packs that we had created there, and one with Action Staffing in Elizabeth. But in the absence of having another group there, it's kind of hard to dictate conditions within the whole market. So we do have to think about other ways of organizing, including a traditional union, right? So with these new NLRB decisions, that makes it a little bit easier, at least in theory, to have that happen. Potentially having, for example, if there is a union shop, a client that's organized a client firm, to have people that are being sent to that shop be honorary members of the union for the day, kind of like a prevailing wage type thing, as well as directly organizing the temp agency itself, which seems like it's a little bit harder. So like one of the things we've also done here, just beginning to get started with Steelworkers, is to create a new local. This kind of looking to address that, local 4555. So that's just beginning. It's not obviously an easy thing. There's not much precedent out there for what has worked. They do know the case, in New Bedford, I think, in Massachusetts with UFCW.
Lou, can you just spell your last name? I missed it before.
Sure. It's Kimmel, Kimmel.
Great, thanks.
Thanks, Joe. Any other questions?
Hello?
Yeah,
Hello?
this is Lizzie Grossman. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. I'm not quite, this could be a question for any of the speakers. When it comes to accounting for temp workers, can you tell us a little bit more about how companies are required to report this hiring and how the Bureau of Labor and Department of Labor account for temp workers, whether it's by individual industry or just as temporary workers overall? And part of the reason I'm asking is because on occasion when I've asked companies that I know hire temp workers, they've often been very reluctant to answer questions about what proportion of the workforce is hired through temp agencies.
Well, I guess this is Dave DeSario. One way to look at it is that companies don't have to report the number of temp workers that they hire. They're legally not their employees. A lot of times you'll see temp workers hired often at government agencies when there's a hiring freeze, or at a public company when there's a hiring freeze, because bringing on these new people does not mean bringing on employees. So they don't have to be counted by those companies, and they don't have to report how many temp workers they have.
Hello?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question. This is Bruce Vail. This is sort of a new subject for me. Early on in the conversation, somebody mentioned Kelly Girls, which is the only temp agency that I've really sort of heard of before. Can you run through some of the bigger agencies and what they do and who their clients are, just to give me sort of an idea of what kind of businesses we're talking about?
Yeah, the other top firms mentioned were Manpower, Kelly Girl, and Labor Ready, but there are many others. Lou, I don't know if you'd like to share what are some of the ones that are represented by some of your members at New Labor.
Sure. To the list you just mentioned, I would also add Adecco. So all those ones you mentioned cover a variety of industries. So it's not just like we have mostly low-wage Latino immigrant workers. So the temp work that happens here is geared towards light industrial facilities and light manufacturing facilities. So it's kind of a racialized market that has happened over time. You mentioned Labor Ready. Labor Ready in this area kind of sets up shop where African Americans live. The temp agencies in this area have kind of gravitated to where Latinos live, and they're kind of like a gatekeeper for access to be able to work on work sites at the host employers. So some of the bigger ones in this area include Liner or Lanier, Rick Force, On Target Staffing, which have regional impact, but I think maybe Liner is the only one that's national. Temp agencies in this area kind of come and go. Some are fly by night, where a lawsuit might cause them just to change name and reopen shop with the same people but under a different name. So some like Select Group is one of those that, and Staff Management, for example, or CRS Corporate Resource Services was an umbrella group of different temp agencies that have existed for a while but had some lawsuits and they kind of disappeared.
So this is Dave DeSario, just to elaborate there. There are a lot of them. There are 124 staffing agencies in the U.S. that do more than $100 million a year in revenue. They have many different individual offices, and when you look at the number of staffing agency offices in the U.S., it's about 50,000 of them, which is 3 times as many as there are McDonald's. So this is a problem that has grown enormously over the last few decades, and in large part undercover, because there's not a big golden arches above it for you to see that and identify it. The thought of temp workers as Kelly Girls or Kelly Services workers is a common one, and that was sort of what the industry was many decades ago. It was temporary office assistants or admins, or often women that were entering the workforce for the first time, and Kelly Girls provided that. Today, that office or administrative section of the temp industry is only about 25% of the jobs that they place. About 40% are industrial jobs. These are They range from light manufacturing to very heavy industrial. And the remainder, which is almost half the temp industry, are higher skilled, higher wage, higher education jobs like healthcare. There are a lot of nurses, doctors, healthcare professionals. There are IT professionals, engineers, accountants, lawyers, you name it. It's really every industry and every occupation that the temp industry touches at this point. But when you break it down, you look at that industrial sector, that's about 1 million American workers in any given week that are working industrial jobs through temp agencies.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks, Bruce. Any other questions from callers on the line?
Hi, this is Kogan from Politico. I have a quick question.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just wondering if there was anything, if you guys have been talking to anyone in Congress at all, and if there was any bills in the works or anything that's been proposed or any kind of like legislative activity that relates to this.
Yes, this is Jessica for National Kosh. I can tell you a little bit about some of the ongoing efforts that some of our Kosh groups have been able to move forward. One of the Kosh groups that has engaged the strongest in moving legislation has been Massachusetts. In 2013, they passed a temporary worker right to know bill. And this was basically demanding that temporary agencies provide some of the most basic information from who the employer is, the name, address, the rate of pay, pay date, information that many times a lot of the temp workers were not familiar with, given the profile of a lot of workers in the area being low-wage immigrant workers. That was in Massachusetts. There's also been efforts in California as well, where we have a bill that was passed with the support of WorkSafe and SoCal Kosh here in California. And currently, we have several Kosh groups that are engaging and trying to organize and push legislation for temporary worker protections. Unfortunately, there isn't much. We are working. National Kosh has worked with OSHA to try to set some standards, including joint employer liability for health and safety. But we are aware that there is a lack of laws, and there is a clear guidelines that are set by some of the government agencies, but nothing that is set in stone as a law for employers. So it depends, and it varies state to state. At this moment, some of the states that do include, like as I mentioned, Massachusetts, California, Illinois.
This is Lou here from Lou. I would just add that a lot of this is because our understanding of employee and employers, built on the economic past. So it's a very vertical relationship just between, in this case, it would be a temp worker and a temp agency. But going back to what Jessica's adding about having joint employer status is pretty important because it's kind of missing that picture. So we're basically trying to fit into what's already out there if we're creating legislation instead of trying to re-envision who is an employee and who is ultimately responsible for those conditions of work. So if there are these big supply chains, when you have these, like the case of Amazon I mentioned, Amazon isn't guilty of anything because it was never their employee that moved their goods, but rather it was an employee of Abacus Staffing, and it was established that there was a joint employer relationship between Abacus and Genco, right? So if we're thinking bigger picture, we also need to look at supply chains and, potentially looking at like corporate social responsibility pacts, and a lot of major companies have them, but it's making sure that they're being enforced throughout their supply chains.
Got it. Thank you.
Thanks, Kogan. Thanks,
and
Lou.
Just to add to that, every state has laws that specifically protect temp agency businesses. There's only 3 states that have laws that actually specifically protect temp workers. So this points to the success of this $100 billion a year industry in shaping the policy in which, and the laws in which they operate. There have been small and some successful movements from local organizations, but at this point, temp workers do really lack a national voice to push back and get national legislation done.
Thank you, Jessica, David, Lou, and thanks, Kogan. Any other questions from callers?
Yeah, I have a question.
Go ahead.
It's Bruce again. I have a question. It's Bruce again.
Go ahead, Bruce.
Yeah, a couple years back, my wife had gone to a staffing agency here in Baltimore, and I can't remember the name of it right now. And her experience there was sort of interesting. She went there, and she was interviewed, and they sent her off to a company, and then when she was there, she found out that they paid that the employer paid the staffing company like $25 an hour, just using that as an example, and then they paid her like $13 an hour, and they kept the difference. My wife worked there for like 3 months, and then they offered her a full-time job. So the staffing agency was really sort of a recruiting arm for the ultimate employer. Is that sort of a common thing, or is that the old model that you were talking about before, the old Kelly Girls model?
That sort of pay discrepancy and that model is how they do business. That's extremely common. What is shockingly uncommon is that your wife was offered a permanent job. The temp industry tells prospective employees that, quote, 99% of temp workers who want permanent jobs will find one. What we find is that temp workers are often stuck in these jobs for many years, and that the rate of temp workers being hired to permanent positions, which is really why they're there in the first place, is closer to 3 to 5% of workers. So that she got hired is great. So, but that discrepancy between pay and the billing rate is completely normal.
I would also add, this is Lou here, that in our experience here, there are facilities that will have the temp agencies on site, and they will steer people to go to the temp agency to apply for work. So it's part of the business model is to have them literally, part of their physical plan.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bruce. Any other questions from callers? Going once and going twice. Well, listen, there's no other questions. If you do have further questions or anybody needs to follow up, you can hit me at roger@nationalcosh.org. We do have the slides we showed are available on our website. I'll send that link around. A couple of folks joined late, and we will have a recording available later if you want to get every last word. And please let us know if there are follow-up questions. You can email me at roger@nationalcosh.org, and I'll connect you with the panelists or whatever else you might need while you're working on your stories. Really, really appreciate everybody's time, and really appreciate the panelists, Lou and Jessica and Dave. And sorry Lena couldn't join us, but I hope you got some good information, and stay in touch and let us know if you have any further questions. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Roger, for your work.
Thank you.
Thanks, Roger.
Thanks, Dave. You were great. Thanks, Lou.